Hi, we're at the 2016 Festival of Books in Tucson, Arizona. Today we're interviewing Caragh O'Brien, the author of the Birthmark series. My name is Tiffany Appel, and I will be interviewing the author along with my sister Lacey and Christy from Amphi Middle. Good morning, Caragh O'Brien.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm psyched to be here. This is a great day, and I'm just so excited that I have a chance to meet some readers and talk about books and see what the festival is all about.
Well, it's nice to have you in Arizona, considering the Vault of Dreamers is set there. Have you found it any similar to anything that you imagined?
A little bit. Actually, I was driving through Arizona back in January on a cross-country trip out from Connecticut to California, and I was passing as a train was going by in front of the mountains with the desert, and I was like, that's just like the train that Rosie grew up in. So that was really exciting, and I snapped a picture, and I felt like totally connected to Arizona. But I've always liked this state. When I've traveled through it before, I just like the landscape, and people that I've met have always been super nice. So I thought, let's just put a book out there. Not all of the young adult books have to happen in New York or Los Angeles. Let's make sure Arizona gets represented too.
It is kind of funny because so many books are set around giant cities, and for it to be in Arizona, it's not really recognized as a famous state. Did you have to do a lot of research around the whole, media coverage and how the Vault of Dreamers was set around a TV show?
Well, I had always been interested in reality TV shows like American Idol and Survivor and The Biggest Loser, and I was just really interested in why people would go on those shows and what it says about the rest of us that we want to watch them, because, don't you sort of get obsessed with these shows? Yeah, you kind of do. I didn't have to do too much research into them, except I did look back to see how long they've existed, because I was curious about that. And I wish that I'd had a chance to go backstage and see what it's really like there. But I think the closest I did for research was when I taught a broadcasting class myself when I was a high school English teacher, and I got to see a little bit about this action that's actually happening in this room. And whenever I could, I inserted that into the novel to give it some authenticity, because the school itself has these cameras around that are on the students all the time. And for that, I just was so freaked out by that possibility that's really what I wanted to think about for the book.
One thing that I also wondered about the book is a big part of the main protagonist, Rosie Sinclair, is that she's breaking away from a sort of dead-end life into Arizona. Is that inspired by any real-life experience?
I had a lot of students when I was a high school English teacher that were not living in the best circumstances themselves, and I really felt like the school was a chance to give them exposure to another life, and for other people to be exposed to what their lives were as well. And I've also done some volunteering at Journey House, which is a residence for girls who are in the juvenile system back in Connecticut. So I have a chance to really meet some girls that are in some really tough situations, and they haven't had a lot of choices. And I know that informed what my characters were living through. And basically, since most of the book takes place after she's left her home situation, I also really wanted it to just be a sort of I don't want to say a Cinderella story quite so much, because that sounds too dazzling and princessy and everything, but the concept of being transformed and making choices to take yourself someplace new and expand your horizons is definitely something I wanted to be thinking about. These are great questions, by the way. Winging it is good. We can wing it.
Is it ever difficult to write from a teenager's point of view? Or do you think that, is there sort of just a way that you've sort of mapped it out in your head when writing?
I think that I try to be really careful when I'm writing to not try to mimic a teenager's vernacular and try to actually have people speak like they do when they're teenagers now, because I'm not sure I could pull that off with authenticity. Because my books are set in the future, if my characters who are teenagers speak in ways that are not exactly appropriate or fitting to what's going on right now, I think I'm given a little bit of slack, because who knows what people will be talking 300 years from now or even 60 years from now. But I feel a lot of respect for the teenagers that I've known, both in my classes and with my own kids. And I feel like as long as I'm coming from the place where we're all human, then I should go ahead and write about people who are different ages than I am, or who have different backgrounds, or have different races, or have different genders. So I feel like as long as I'm keeping it honest, then I'm free to try whatever I can do.
This is a complete long shot, but I noticed that in the book, Rosie Sinclair has kicked off the college bound track. And
Yes.
they do certain tracks like that in Germany. Is there any connection between that, or just a long shot?
Well, even in the public school where I taught, there were clear tracks that were called. We actually had a track that was called college prep, which makes me think, well, if that's college prep, what's the other track? College not prep, or doomed to? I don't know. They were already making choices about people's futures and sort of holding up college as this prize when kids were 14 years old. And I don't think that the tracks were particularly productive for everybody.
So I read online that you've written about 20 books or so. And The Vault of Dreamers, you have 2 out of 3 done.
I do.
Are you just planning to do the 3, or any prequels, more sequels, or?
I'm going to wrap it up with 3, and I had a draft of the 3rd book that was due last Friday, so I've just sort of gotten my head around the main idea of what's going to be happening with the 3rd book, and then I'm going to stop it there. I think that'll be enough. I sort of feel like for the arc of the story and what's happening with the characters and save the world stuff, I feel like I can wrap that up in 3 books.
Is there a process which you write on? Do you develop the idea, write it down, and then just sort of go in depth with it?
Yeah, I have this terrible process that nobody should ever emulate because it's so messy and horrible, and I have to write about 10 or 12 drafts of a book for it to come together. And my first draft is just horrible. Like this one I sent in it's 240 double-spaced manuscript pages in it. It's kind of coherent, it's kind of coherent. You would read a scene and think, oh, this scene makes sense, but the scene maybe doesn't even belong in the whole book. So I have to keep revising over and over again to just get a sense of even what's there. And then usually around draft 7 or 8, I go, oh, this is what the book is about. And then I keep filling it in and developing it. So by the time it's done, hopefully this 240-page manuscript will have expanded, maybe past, maybe 500 pages, and then shrink back down to something like 350 or 400 pages. So like I say, it's not, I'm sure there are other writers that have better methods, but this is the only one that I have found that works at all, and it seems to keep showing up. I keep inventing the same bad method to write a novel every time I write one.
I've noticed a lot of the same jumps, between being a high school teacher and becoming a writer. Is there anything that particularly inspired you to make that jump?
Wow. Well, I was on a sabbatical, so I was taking a leave of absence from my teaching when I came out when I moved to California 8 years ago and wrote the Birthmark trilogy. And there was really a combination of a lot of different things because I loved teaching English. I really did. I liked being with my students, and they were always passing me great books like Twilight to read, and I just loved Twilight, and it just seemed like the author had such a ball writing that book. I was like, why have I waited my whole life for someone to give me permission to write a book that's just super fun to write, So reading that book mattered a lot. And then another thing that made a difference, this is kind of a downer, but my father had passed away in December, just a couple months before I was writing Birthmarked, and he lived life to the fullest. And he took risks, and up to the very end, he was like, you have to go for the things that matter to you. And I had always been doing some writing, but when I had that huge chunk of time, I could have spent it being a volunteer or a substitute teacher in other schools and learning more about teaching, or I could try doing this writing. And I was like, you know what? My dad would want me to write, so I did it in a way to just deal with losing my father and explore this side of me that I'd always relished. And so I wrote Birthmark, but I had no expectation that it would get published. I was fully prepared to just jump right back into my teaching and keep going. So I was shocked when Macmillan offered me a 3-book deal, and then my life changed.
Now you say that you wrote the book after your father's, after you were grieving. Did you base any of the characters in the book after your father?
No, but there is a horrible scene when one of the parents of the characters does die. And when that happened, I definitely tapped into the experience that I had had recently. It was really hard for me to write and almost impossible to go back to revise. And to this day, don't ask me to read those pages because it's just, losing my dad was pretty heartbreaking. And then writing about it, through another character, it definitely allowed me to sort of face it in another way, but it was hard. But I think that's what we do. I mean, when we're writers or artists or whatever you do in your creative life, you don't do the thing that's the easiest. You already know how to do that, right? You try to do the things that puzzle you or challenge you or that you don't know how to do. And that's where I started with Birthmarked, and that's what I'm still trying to do.
It's pretty courageous.
So I have some questions for you. Are any of you also writers?
I like to write, and I'm gonna be a high school English teacher, but I don't know if I'll ever pursue it.
Okay, well that's pretty interesting. And you already know that you want to be a teacher, which means you must be having a good experience in school. Yeah. So was it your librarian that assisted having you come here today to do this interview?
No, actually, it was my English teacher, Mr. Woolsey, last year that I had interviewed an author, and I was just interested in doing it again.
Okay, so you're the repeater. I had heard that there was somebody who was coming back a second time this time. That's great. And you told me that you like to work on short stories?
Yeah, but most of my short stories are kind of saddish. They're set in the future, and I've actually looked back at these stories and I've thought, well, why did I write this? Because most of them have they do have a really dystopian feel to it, and it's sort of like the main characters are always going through these difficult struggles, but in the end they never do get the happy ending.
Yeah. Well, sometimes that's what you do, Christy. Sometimes you're writing things and they don't have a happy ending, and then you have to wonder, well, what am I writing this for? Because don't you have the sense that readers expect you to have a happy ending?
Yes.
Yeah, you do. But then you're like, well, who am I really writing it for?
And the way that I got into this was I'm a little new at this, but I had done a piece of artwork for the library, and one of the librarians, she was giving me 2 books, and then she said that I could interview the author of one book, and I don't know, I ended up here. So.
And you said that you read the birthmark story. That's the one that you. Yeah.
I did read the birthmarks.
And you were 12 at the time.
Yeah. I didn't really understand some of it. I remember that. I remember I was confused and I had to ask my teacher about a couple of words. But I thought it was a good book overall. Yeah, for sure.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm sometimes asked if my books are appropriate for kids, and I think it really depends on the person. What I really like most about reading is actually our libraries, our school libraries and our public libraries, because then readers can go in and they can pick whatever they want, and you can start reading Birthmarked or something else, and if you like it, you just keep going, and if you don't, you chuck it over your shoulder and go find some manga or something else, But if we didn't have those choices, then you could kind of never discover what you like to read. So it's great if you've got good libraries, and it sounds like you do.
One reason I really grasped Rosie as a character and liked her is the same reason you liked writing her. Writing helps you get over some grief, and that's one reason that I grasped who she was with her family and the way that she was getting away from it.
Yeah, she definitely has a tough family. Her relationship with her stepfather in particular is a little bit dicey, and I was concerned. I didn't want to be writing into a stereotype of evil step-parents, but I also couldn't have Rosie's home life be completely rosy, to throw a pun out there. And he just sort of evolved into this guy who was really mean on the surface, but in subsequent books he has some substance to him. So it was interesting for me to see what happened with him. Yeah.
Was there ever a moment that you realized you wanted to become an author?
Wow. I started writing when I was in 7th grade, when Mr. Sanborn required me to write a journal, and we all had to do a certain quota of pages every week. So I was doing that, and after the assignment was over, I kept writing, and I eventually found that the writing and the thinking kind of merged and became the same thing. And I didn't really think about becoming a writer. I just was reading all the time and writing all the time. And when I went to college, I wanted to become an engineer and build bridges. I thought that would be really interesting. And then I took this creative writing class, and I realized, wait a minute, all those books that I've been reading, those are by people that wrote them. And it was like, why didn't I realize that maybe that was something I could do? And then people, everyone say, oh, writers, they can't make a living, and it's never going to work out, and you've got to be, daft to go forward with that. And I wanted to try. It took me a long time to get to the point where I was good enough to write Birthmarked, frankly. I think I had to do a lot of living and a lot of writing just to get to that point. But I'm glad I persevered with it. And now I would say, yeah, I would like to be a writer. I want to be a writer now. So this is the time.
20 published books, and now she wants to be a writer.
It's not that many books. It's not quite so many. But yeah, now is the time.